Previously on Keep and Destroy.
Hello, Adam. Thank you very much for inviting me. A very unique and special episode. It's like something out of a Hitchcock movie. It was a tough call between this and Terror in New York City.
I'm glad you didn't pick Terror. I'm so sick of that.
Captain Grey saves him. Captain Grey is just awesome.
Cheer up, Penelope. You'll be all right, provided they don't ask you to sing.
I love how their conflict subsides as they both weaken and they begin to depend on the other to survive.
This show ain't no good.
Hello and welcome to Keep and Destroy. This is your host, Adam Luff. This is the Gerry podcast where I interview the fans and ask what 5 they would like to keep and what 5 they would like to destroy. Continuing where we left off, this is part 2 of Emma Whitehouse-Bird's interview.
And here we are with the destroy list. So what's the first thing that you want to destroy, Emma?
First thing is Captain Scarlet's The Inquisition.
Quite a popular one on the destroy list, definitely.
Yeah, just 2 words, clip episode. They rob us of finales. But I've chosen The Inquisition over the other clip episodes because not one iota of it makes any sense. I have no idea what the Mystrons were doing in this episode. Why didn't they just kill Captain Blue to access the Spectrum cipher codes? It's been established that once they kill someone, the replicant then inherits that person's knowledge.
True.
So why not just kill Captain Blue?
I think it's because turning him into a Mystron, there's no longer going to be that traitor aspect. I think they wanted to discredit Captain Blue by getting him to do that. Regardless of what would have happened, whether Captain Blue would have been saved or not, he still would have been compromised. So I think it's the idea that they wanted him to be disgraced. It's still convoluted all the same. Yeah, it's... Even though I've said that I do like this episode, just not as a finale. Yeah, I might be changing my mind on the Inquisition. It was never that high on my list anyway, but I think it's getting low now.
Maybe this will seal the deal. In the end, it's revealed they have truth drugs. Why didn't they use that as their first move? They've got him. He's right there. Just drug him.
Unless it wasn't a truth drug and Captain Blue called their bluff or something. I don't know. It's because obviously it's the end of the episode. We don't get a chance to find that out.
When he says we've got no time for games, clearly they have. These are very patient Mysterons.
Yeah.
Why are they listening to Captain Blue ramble on about these stories, giving Spectrum more time to locate them? I mean, the best explanation I can think of is that maybe the Mysterons had put so much effort into building that fake cloud base, and so for economic reasons, they wanted to use the space as much as possible.
Well, speaking of that scene where Captain Blue is thrown out the window, this is one of the more famous or infamous bloopers. Do you know if you freeze frame it and go frame by frame, you can actually see an actual puppeteer's hand?
Oh, really? Captain Blue jumping out the window, that leads to one of the best things about the episode, that face he pulls once he slides down the sky backdrop. That is the face of a man who is going through an existential crisis. Yes. Even the last line makes no sense when Captain Scarlet says,
"Come on, Adam. You can tell me all about it. Back on the real cloud base."
He hadn't told him anything at that point.
Maybe they know through their investigations, but yeah, from our perspective, it makes no sense.
Stand by for no action whatsoever. This is Stingray's The Cool Caveman.
We have a landmark. In the entire run of Keep and Destroy, we have now covered all 3 Stingray Dream episodes, and this is the worst one. So thank you for picking this one. This is terrible.
It is terrible. I mean, straight away, the title is misleading. There is nothing remotely cool about this episode. I mean, in the past, we've seen Stingray battle sea creatures, save Marineville, fight Titan, discover underwater cities. And in this gripping adventure, the major concern is, what are the characters going to wear for a fancy dress party?
We've got to find out.
I reckon they were out of ideas at that point.
Pretty much, yeah. It was episode 33 in the production order, so yeah, you're right. But it's the fact that, and I've said this again before in the past, but Troy gets to have a dream episode again. I mean, you could give this to Phones and the story would not change at all because he gets the same costume as Troy.
And I'm not against dream sequences when they're done right.
Yes,
you know, at their best, they can be fun and imaginative, but at their worst, you have episodes like this.
I did notice one thing when I was watching it recently. There's a bit of a sound error. I don't know if it was due to like they had to re-record it or something, but there's a moment where Sam Shaw is yelling at Fisher and the sound drops slightly.
Needs to be, Lieutenant. If anything happens to that ship before it reaches port at midnight, we could be in real trouble.
Why, sir? She's miles from the coast.
If you spent less time play acting, you'd realize that she's going through the North Pacific Current. And that means if her cargo is exposed in the sea, the radiation will be carried right to our doorstep.
Gee, that's serious.
You bet it is, Fisher. And take that stupid disguise off your face.
Sound design is always one of the hardest things in editing, and I've been experiencing it with Keep and Destroy, where if I've got to re-record some stuff, you can tell just from the slight pitch is slightly off.
One moment which made me hit the rewind button was when Troy and Phones were swimming towards the cavemen, and in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you can clearly see a miniature fan. Was the editor asleep? I did a double take when I saw that, and I laughed my head off.
All right. The actual destruction of the Shenandoah is quite effective as well. I quite like that scene, but, you know, we are desperately trying to find some good stuff in this episode, and there isn't anything. But and don't get me started on the cavemen and their chanting. Got really irritating. But also, the brown-haired caveman is voiced by Ray Barrett.
Men from Iron Fish have gone.
But then in the next scene, he's voiced by David Graham.
He's dying.
So they can't even get the characters consistent.
They must die too.
I don't know who Marina is supposed to be dressed up as, other than some beatnik.
Yeah.
Though that jumper has been handed down to several other characters afterwards, because Atlanta wore it in A Nut for Marineville, and then Roach wore it in The Perils of Penelope, and then Jeff wore it in Attack of the Alligators. People just don't want to wear that jumper.
Commander Shaw has some very savage moments in this episode, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah.
The only way you could look good is to get a complete new face. Half the people in Marineville look stupid enough as it is without putting on costumes.
Terrible episode all the same. Absolute garbage. If it wasn't for the invaders, this would be the worst episode, but I do like this just a tiny bit more than the invaders. I really hate that episode.
Third is Stingray's Loch Ness Monster.
I quite like that one myself. It's
you?
light-hearted, but why do you not like it?
It was silly. I think it was a missed opportunity as well. You know, the entire point of the show is exploring underwater worlds, and this could have been a really creepy episode, you know, building up the atmosphere and the size of the monster. But instead, it's just a tourist attraction scheme with a Loch Ness Monster that looks too much like a sock puppet.
It was the space monster from 5XL5.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, obviously
Yeah.
slightly modified. The idea of it being just a tourist attraction, I like that nice little twist, because obviously they're still aiming at children, so I guess they wanted to have a light-hearted reveal. And it does go with that whole theory about, you know, is the Loch Ness Monster real? A lot of people in Scotland will use it as a way of exploiting tourists. So it plays well with that. And it's interesting how most people depict the Loch Ness Monster as more of a dinosaur. It's got a body and it's got legs and a tail. Whereas this one, it looks more like a snake, which is an interesting...
Yes.
But then there's no way to prove them wrong, because again, there's no proof that it exists. So for all we know, it could be a snake. However, because this is the only Stingray episode that has a giant sea monster, it would have been interesting actually if they did attempt something like this with a real hostile monster, like if Titan has his own giant octopus. Maybe if they took inspiration from H.P. Lovecraft, and it'd been interesting if there was an episode of Stingray where they were fighting Cthulhu.
Yeah.
Giant Cthulhu coming out the sea or something. Yeah, they should have had more giant monsters in Stingray.
Yeah, absolutely.
We talked about in The Cool Caveman how Phones never got a dream episode. A dream sequence of him dancing in a kilt isn't enough to make up for that. Of course, this is the first episode to feature Admiral Denver, but that puppet had previously been used in 5XL5 as well. He was General Rossiter in Space City Special, which was the penultimate episode. So they had that puppet ready to use in Stingray. Admiral Denver is quite a one-note character, really. I'm glad he didn't turn up that many times, although he does come back for one other episode, which was never actually shown. On the DVDs, there's this extra called Japanese linking material, where they were trying to sell it in Japan, so they filmed some brand new sequence of Sam Shaw and Admiral Denver watching home movies, basically. So they did another flashback episode. I don't know if you ever saw the Gerry Anson night on BBC 3 in 2008, where they showed a documentary on Gerry Anson's career. They also promoted a brand new Stingray episode.
Wink, wink.
Called The Reunion Party. And I thought, that's the Japanese linking material on the DVD, isn't it? And I watched it on BBC 3, and it was.
Stingray's Raptures of the Deep. And I feel I'll point out that I do like Stingray. I know I've had many Stingray choices on my destroy list, but I couldn't help but put this episode on there. It's just, oh my word, this episode is a nightmare in every sense of the word.
It's going back to the Cham Cham, the music I was referring to. I really hate that fairy tale garbage. Out of the Dream episodes, I used to say that this was my favourite. However, in more recent times, I think I'm most likely going to go with Tom Thumb Tempest as my favourite, just because of the surrealness of that episode. But I still like Raptures of the Deep, except for the musical part. Troy's singing is just, I can never get over that. But what's your take on Troy's singing?
Oh, it's, at the time it was too insane to laugh at. I just sat there in disbelief. When the music started up, I thought, no, he's not going to sing. No, Gerry would never do that. Oh, he did.
Yeah. To be fair, though, Steve Zodiac did sing in Space City Special, so they tested the waters, pardon the pun, before with 5XL5, so it kind of doesn't surprise me that Troy would also sing.
It's just so jarring because it doesn't sound at all like him.
No.
You can tell it's just lip syncing the theme tune.
Yeah. You've got Troy who's singing right into her face, just loud as hell. And then you got Atlanta who's watching, who looks a bit perverted. And then you got the phone, just looks so indifferent to the whole thing. So. And then you got the Aquafibians watching in the window as well. I can imagine they would have been outside laughing.
Tone Deaf Tempest is singing again. Who's he think he is? To Dexter? Whatever time wants him dead.
I don't care whether it's Chitty Chitty Bang Bang or La La Land or whatever. I have no time for musicals.
I'm the same a little bit when it comes to musicals. The fact that it is actually featured as one of the flashbacks in the final episode, Aquanaut of the Year. I mean, they had over 30 episodes to choose from, and they chose this one. There was no need to remind us of this episode, you know. We have to endure the worst dialogue from two of the most legendary voice actors, you know, Ray Barrett and David Graham, who have to voice the Hepcat pilots.
I do like those characters because they're so incompetent and so ridiculous how stupid they are. I can just have a laugh at them. You can tell they're having fun with it. I also quite like Don Mason having a little bit more of a camp tone to his voice when he's playing King Troy. It just sounds like he's having fun with it.
I remember the first time I saw it. There are some scenes I had to look away from the screen. It was just too cringe-worthy.
Oh,
but
God.
yeah, I can imagine that the actors had an absolute blast with this episode.
I can't narrow down what was the first Stingray episode I ever saw, because I've got very hazy memories of the late 80s when they were being shown on ITV. This was before they started showing them on BBC. And from my memory, I thought it was a fleet of terrorfishes swooping in and just bombing the palace. So that was what I could remember. And then when I watched the episode again in the early 2000s, it's just a couple of aquafibians where they reused the same puppet to make it look like an army. So it's just them on foot. So, okay. Yeah. It's still a good sequence though, but I remember it being a hell of a lot more epic than what the reality was. Yeah, I've pretty much changed my opinion now. Tom Thumb Tempest is the best of the three, and Raptures of the Deep is in the middle. Even though there are still some bits I like about it, but I think the main reason is it's because it's not the Cool Caveman. I think that's its saving grace, really. But I can never get over the Cool Caveman. But mind you, we've said enough of that one.
Final one is UFO, the Square Triangle. Oh my word, where do I begin with this? This episode is a bit of an anomaly compared with the previous choices on my destroy list, in that the episode for the most part is actually pretty decent. It's not the worst. There's certainly been far far worse from Gerry Anderson.
Oh yeah.
It's a bit slow in places, but the acting is good and the premise is interesting. The plot centres on a woman and her lover who are planning to murder her husband. And while this is taking place, Ed Straker lets an alien ship land on Earth in order to study it. From the very beginning, Ed Straker's actions seem particularly rash in this episode. It's a good thing Ed Straker did let the UFO pass through, because that must have been a relief for the interceptors. Because what were they going to fire at it with? If you look at the footage, they actually use stock footage showing the interceptors returning to Moonbase.
Yeah.
And they haven't got any missiles, but they hadn't fired at it anyway. So what were they going to fire at?
That was one of my notes. Yeah, just ridiculous that of all the stock footage they could have picked. Yeah.
However, it's the choices made by the characters and especially the resolution, which ultimately makes Shadow and everyone look terrible.
To be fair, Ed Straker did say, and I quite like this line, when he says that we're not in the moralizing business, because it's a great line for someone who at this point has no choice but to be cold, really, because this is a guy who's lost his own marriage, really. So yeah, they're in a position where they can't take the moral high ground. They have no choice but to just do their mission of stopping aliens. And
that quote from Ed Straker, I'm glad you brought that up, because to Ed Straker I say, no, you're not in the moralizing business, but you are in the protection business. But I wouldn't make a big deal out of it if they genuinely couldn't do anything. Heck, if they tried to do something and then they discovered that they were in fact powerless, then the episode could be really quite tragic and poignant, and it would have made that end shot, that fantastic end shot with the two lovers walking away from the husband's grave, feel all the more disturbing.
I don't like, though, how we'd already seen the reveal in the last shot, and then it fades to black, and then we get the footage of her just walking away. I think it needed to be one or the other. I didn't like the idea that you already had the last shot, and then you fade out, and then you're just telling us more of what we already know anyway. They should have either just gone to the regular credits, or they should have not have that final shot and end the last scene with, with the Shadow regulars talking about what are they going to do, and then reveal that this is what they did. So it's a good ending. It just they had too much of it. They should have gone with one or the other, in my opinion.
I just think it's such an unpleasant episode, which just gets under my skin. And it makes me appreciate shows like The Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlet even more, because I love episodes in Gerry Anderson where they shed light on revealing what makes them who they are and what they stand for. Take, for example, The Imposters, which sees International Rescue hunted down for a crime they didn't commit. And yet, after careful thought, they choose to put their whole operation on the line in order to save one man's life, and that's how much one life matters to them. I mean, granted, Shadow has got a lot more responsibility protecting the Earth, but in this episode I can't see a risk in just saving that man's life.
Or even just leaving an anonymous tip with the police or something. I see your point. That concludes our keep and destroy list, so thank you very much. But I do have one other question before you go. How would you summarize the works of Gerry Anderson to a newcomer?
The stars really were aligned for Gerry Anderson, I think. I can't grasp what life was like back in the 1960s. It was a very different world, and he came at just the right time, as did his team, Derek Meddings, Bob Bell, Barry Gray. Everyone was at their peak just at the right time with something like Thunderbirds. What could you produce for children today that would in any way have the same impact? And as an aspiring filmmaker, I can safely say that Gerry Anderson has fueled my passion for films, and I'm confident that he will continue to do so for many more generations to come.
Yeah, they were certainly pioneers of their craft, definitely. I completely agree with all that. Yeah, and as a filmmaker myself, I share those views as well. So thank you for your time, Emma. And yes, it's been a fun time chatting with you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you out there for watching this video. Please give it a like and a share and a subscribe. And if you would like to donate to the show to help it continue, please go to Buy Me a Coffee or GoFundMe. The links are in the description. This is Adam Luff, signing out. This is Agent 47 calling in as a rescue beast. What's on your mind, Ma? Yep, wondering the same thing myself. Well, that's mighty decent of you, Mr. Tracy.